All right, everyone. Welcome to Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Paul LeBaron from Hermosa Beach PD in California. He has over 32 years of experience in law enforcement. He's actually on the wellness committee for Cal Chief, and he's a co-chair for their annual training symposium. So I'm really, really excited to have Chief LeBaron on the show today to share his insights. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Paige. It is an honor to be here and love what you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, I was thinking about this earlier. We've met a few times over the years, and you have just been so positive and kind and nice. And it's always just such a good interaction whenever I talk to you. So I was really looking forward to this conversation because I was like, oh, I really like him. He's so nice. And obviously you have a lot of experience and insights into wellness, but I think I have kind of that personal connection with you that made me really excited for today.
I appreciate that. I think it's a part of our long-standing culture in policing that we put on the serious face, and I do what I can to break some of those stereotypes and just try and find an opportunity to say hi with a smile.
Yeah, and I appreciate that so much. I want to give, anyone who doesn't know you, and obviously a lot of people in the California area do know you, but if anyone's listening who doesn't know you, you've been on this job from this career for 32 years. What made you choose law enforcement? Why this career choice? And kind of maybe give us some background on what those 32 years looked like for you.
For sure. So if you do know me, just tune out because you've heard this story before. But when I was growing up as a little kid, I come from a family of 8 kids. My dad was a professional boxer, um, just a very unique kind of a family situation there. And then he came from Canada to California to sell insurance, and that's where I was born, is in California. And ever since I was a little kid, people would ask me, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to be a police officer." And I didn't know why. I just like I'm sure I'd seen something on TV, and it was probably that motivated me. But it was just naturally something I said. And so the difference between me and a lot of kids is I never stopped saying it.
Mm.
And when I was in middle school, I remember I had a chance to sign up for a ride along with the local police department. I grew up in Costa Mesa, and so I was able to go to the police station. I was able to meet the police officer. I was probably 13 at the time, and he showed me around the station, showed me the jail. We went out in the car. We were probably out for 30 minutes or something, and I remember two things. We drove really fast, and we stopped and got a donut. And I was like, "That's it. This is the
Sold.
career for me." Yeah, and so that was kind of the foundation. Obviously, there's been some different perspectives, and my vantage point has changed quite a bit. But I was fortunate to never have to ever worry about what I was going to do when I grow up because it was just a natural calling for me.
I love that story. And I think that's so funny. You're like, sold. That's it.
Hmm.
Driving fast and a little sweet treat at the end. Um, was he like particularly like was there anything about him that stood out that really made you want this even more? Like was he like really nice? Did he talk about the job? Like was there anything outside of that where you were like, yeah, like that's definitely what I want to be?
There was nothing that stood out as far as like, yeah, this is what he said or anything like that. But
Yeah.
he actually took the time to talk to me. And when you're 13 years old, you don't talk to police officers unless you're related to one. And I'd never interacted with any of them. So it was the first chance I had to be able to just break down any perceptions, stereotypes, or even questions I might have had about police. And he was just somebody who was accessible, and I really appreciated that. And like you said, he was nice, and that not that I didn't expect him to be nice, but being nice just it really does make a difference.
And I think it's a testament to like what we talked about before too. Like you just never know how you can impact someone's day or someone's life. Like that impacted your life. If that officer was like not nice to you and like didn't give you the time of day, like it may have possibly shifted your perspective. And so I think that it's just a testament to like you never know.
Yeah,
If you lead with kindness, like you could impact someone's life for the positive. And so trying to hold yourself to that standard as much as you can, as a person, but especially in this profession as well.
Yeah. And it's funny. One of the things that I always look for is anytime I have an interaction with somebody in a professional capacity, I've always felt that the greatest compliment that someone could give me is if they are saying something to the extent of, you're not like other cops. Now, I qualify that because I know a lot of police officers, and I am like a lot of cops because cops are good. They're good people. The police, the law enforcement policing profession is good. But people's perceptions, their stereotypes, their expectations interacting with a police officer is about what you'd expect when you interact with a dentist. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to like it, but it'll go away quick and you don't have to see him for a while. So when you can get somebody to have an interaction where they have to check their stereotypes and say, you're not like what I expected, I consider that a compliment. So that notion of lead with kindness already puts people kind of on their heels because that's not what they're used to with law enforcement, at least in their minds.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with that. One of the things that you and I connected on, over the years is, you know, I think as individuals, we all have our own stories too, and kind of what motivates us to do the things that we do. And, I've shared my story with you before, and you've heard this maybe a couple times now. So it's kind of one of those things too. It's like if you know it, like tune it out. But, I come from a background of, drug addict parents, and my dad was incarcerated for the sale of narcotics and domestic violence. And that childhood experience that I had really shaped who I am today in many ways. But more importantly, I think it shaped why I'm doing what I'm doing and why wellness is so important to me and my driving force for what I do. I'm curious to know, as an individual, as a person, was there anything in your life that happened that motivated you to either do this job, or that, created that passion for wellness, something that, kind of set you on this trajectory that you're on now?
Yeah, so definitely was. And I've shared this before, and I don't mind sharing it, even though it's very unusual to talk about this because it's personal, and that's why I appreciated you being open to sharing your story in front of a crowd of people that you didn't know, and it was impactful. But
Thank you.
one of the things that really set me on the path to wellness, actually, a couple things. Number one is I had I've worked many years in policing, and so I've seen examples of people doing it right and people doing it wrong. And I'm really conscientious of when it's not being done the right way. And so growing up and learning the role and learning the profession, I will say I had a mental list going. And it was always that thing where if I'm ever in charge, I'm not going to do that. I'll do this. And I just kept that going. So that was motivation number one that really set me on a path to wellness is I saw too much. And I saw too much even when it was done right. Like there were opportunities that were missed by leadership and just by peers where we could have done something else. But I think the other part of this is we sign up to be police officers, and you go through the academy, and you know going in that you're going to deal with difficult times at work, a difficult schedule. You're going to see things that are ugly, and that's all fine, and we can prepare to an extent. And for many people, they see it and they work through it. But what nobody told me is that while you're doing all of that, while you're working and you're learning how to be a good police officer, you're also living your life,
Mm.
and your life outside of police work is also full of drama and garbage and horrible things. And so sometimes, people say, oh, it's hard to be a police officer, and then life becomes difficult because of the job. But we forget that there's also another lane in that road going the opposite direction, which is life is hard, which makes it hard to be a police officer.
Mm.
So, it started for me. I was out of the academy for, I think, less than a year. And I remember one of my classmates, I carpooled with him in the academy. He was a very good friend. And we were working graveyard together. We were in jail in the booking area. He got a call from the booking area, and he looked at me. He says, "I got to go." It was a grand theft or a stolen car happening right now. and he takes off, and he drove super fast up the freeway to get to where it was. And the next thing I hear is just screaming on the radio. And short story to that is he had lost control of his car, and wrapped it around a center pole, and he was killed instantly.
Mm.
And so I got up there hearing the screaming. I was one of the first. I found his body on the freeway, and that alone was traumatic. And then when the chief showed up, he says, "Who knew him best?" And everybody pointed to me, and he says, "All right, come with me. We're going to go tell his wife." And then knocking on that door, it's like, you will never forget that. That was over 30 years ago, and I will never forget any of that. And so that was the first thing. It was obviously work related, but very shortly after that, my wife and I had recently been married. She was pregnant. We went in to hear the heartbeat for the first time, and ended up walking out of that hospital after a emergency surgery to take the baby out because it had passed away. And that, then I have to go back to work with that, and how are you gonna manage this stuff? And it started piling on, right? And then I ended up in federal court as a defendant, and that took a lot of stress. And at the same time, now we actually were lucky enough to have our kids, and we start raising them. And I have one son who broke both arms, oral surgery in his mouth, broke his neck, broke his legs, like you name it, he's broken it. And we're constantly dealing with his health issues, advancing a little bit more. My oldest son, he had some challenges with using drugs. And all I could think about is, don't you know who I am? I worked narcotics most of my career. Like that doesn't happen here, but it did happen. And so it was a big conflict. And I'm constantly trying to deal with this and manage being an effective, productive employee while finding at home that I'm dealing with the same stuff as the people that I'm looking at work. And I think one of the things that really set the path for me is, this was only about 6 or 7 years ago. I was in command at this point. I wasn't a chief yet, but two of my family members were violently murdered, and it was something where I now had to flip roles, and I was no longer the investigator. I was no longer the person in control. I was the person who was trying to console my family as they're dealing with the loss unexpectedly of two very immediate and close family members, and trying to make sense of what happened. And when that happened, I was looking for help because I couldn't keep it together, and I couldn't do what I needed to do. And as I was turning to help, the people that I was working for wanted to help me, and I don't want to miss that point. They wanted to help me. They didn't know how. They did not know how to actually even just wrap their arms around me and give me a hug. Like it just wasn't in their nature. And I remember that feeling of, I can look at you and I can see how much you want to help, and you just can't even do it. And at that moment, that went to the top of my list, is nobody will ever suffer that kind of experience if I'm in charge. We will create a culture where that won't happen, where it's okay to do whatever needs to be done to help somebody who's hurting. And since then, as a chief, you're supposed to have total control of everything. I've lost both of my parents during this time to dementia and Alzheimer's, and caring for them up until, and then losing them. As recently as 4 months, 5 months ago, I lost my mom. And you have to continue to perform while dealing with tragedy, and this notion of resilience takes on an entirely new meaning for me. So that's why wellness matters, because you can't survive not only in this job, but in life, if you don't have the ability to balance and make sense of the things that go on every day.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I didn't know any of that. And so that was an entirely new story to me and so impactful. And it's such a good reminder that you are human. And I do think that there is such a focus on the stuff that happens on the job, and rightfully so. But I also think that people forget that you are also dealing with life. And so I think that that is such a powerful reminder that's like you have to have the resources and the support to be able to process all of it, not just the stuff that happens on the job, but the stuff that's happening in life too. And I also think that it's a reminder, even to me, that like, on the surface, like when you and I met and you come up to me and you're kind and you smile, I would have no idea what's going on beneath the surface unless I asked or, knew you or knew you well enough to know, and I think that that's another reminder. It's like everyone has things going on, and some of them are really tragic and really hard. And, leading with kindness is always good, but it's also like knowing that people might have things going on under the surface, even if they are putting on a smile.
Yeah, yeah, you're so right. As a leader, and even as a if you're a frontline officer or somebody who works in a police department, the best thing you can do is assume that everybody you're interacting with is hurting,
Mm.
and they're hurting bad, and because you probably are. What would make them any different? And so it doesn't negate the fact that we as supervisors have to hold people accountable. You have to do your job. We have a very high stakes job. That's all true. But it's not the what, it's the how. How do you interact with people? How do you hold them accountable? How do you care for them? How do you get the best out of them? And if you just operate with a mindset that everybody's hurting, then it makes it a lot easier to see the person and actually be kind.
And I appreciate that perspective so much because I think that previously, everyone's saying just assume everyone's okay unless otherwise like notified. And if you're sitting here saying, no, I'm going to assume that probably everyone is hurting and needs resources, it's such a different mental shift instead of just assuming everyone's okay.
Yeah,
And it does make you lead with more of that empathy and that like service mentality of like, how can I help you? Because I'm assuming that there's things going on.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I love that.
absolutely.
So how how did you deal with those things? Like was there anything that you did for your own personal wellness that helped you throughout the years to be able to, I know you said like kind of pile it on, like all those things that were piling on top of each other. Was there any like specific resource that you reached out to that helped you?
So, yeah, absolutely. First of all, um, I am willing to share my story, and that doesn't mean everybody has to, but it helps me to be able to talk about some of those things. Um, I went to counseling. Counseling is very important because it helps you see your blind spots, and even just acknowledge things that you may not want to talk about. So you got to find somebody that can listen. It may be a professional counselor. It could be a peer counselor, but you'll need to figure out what it is that you need there. I have one of the things that I really try and emphasize in my life is balance, and it's balance in all areas. So, for me, what does that look like on a daily basis? I go to the gym 4 days a week in the morning. Um, that includes 20 minutes in the sauna, includes soaking in the hot tub. Saturday mornings, I am playing soccer. End of conversation. That is not an option. Um, at some point during the weekend, my wife and I will go on a date, and that is also not an option. I walk my dog every night, and I go to church on Sundays. And so all of those things, even though they may be a hassle or they may not necessarily fit that week's busyness, um, when possible, and that's I think that's a term we need to define. They do happen, and they are a priority to me. So that balance allows me to just release steam as needed, and it's definitely helped me out. So I think the consistency with your day to day is the best way to deal with the big giant problems that come up in your life and in your work. Aside from maybe the professional counseling, you might need to get through some tragedy.
And I love that and I don't know if you realize you did this, you touched on a number of different wellness components in that. And I agree with you. And I was having this conversation earlier about how discipline trumps motivation. Like the more you can have that like consistency and that discipline for the things that you're doing, because motivation is kind of fleeting and like you aren't always going to feel motivated to do certain things. But if you like have that consistency, it helps. But you talked about physical fitness, working out. You talked about faith, going to church. You talked about going on a date, so family, like doing stuff with your wife and your family. And then you talked about having some sort of like hobby, like some sort of interest outside of law enforcement by playing soccer. And so I don't know if you realize that, but like there's these different components of wellness that you do. And I think it fits perfectly into what you said about balance, like balancing all these different components to create what that full picture looks like for you.
Yeah, it's become a part of my life where it's non-negotiable. And I'm a chief of police, and so and I say that not because I'm important. It's actually the opposite, and that's something I can talk about later. I'm not important. I'm very replaceable, by the way. So I have to make sure that I prioritize what matters because if not, everybody else will prioritize it for me. So I was recently reading an article, and it was an article about chiefs and the stress that they're dealing with. And I recognize a lot of people listening aren't chiefs, but it really doesn't matter what your rank or your position is. We all deal with stress in our roles. And the comment was made by somebody that it's impossible for a chief to put their family first. And you could take family out and you could put health, you could put hobbies, you could put anything you want, and you could still make that statement. And I say that's a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
Now I say that because understanding there are times where work comes first. Do I go out on a date with my wife every weekend? No, because sometimes there's major events. We got to deal with it. Do I get to the gym 4 days a week, 100%? No, but I do the best I can with that. The challenge, though, is what is it that we're prioritizing um, as to whether or not we decide that it's impossible to put something first. So if I'm prioritizing my health, my family, or soccer, then it's very easy to say that those will come first. If I prioritize my job, then it's very easy for me to put everything second.
Mhm.
And so it sounds kind of counterintuitive here. And I know a lot of chiefs will hear this and be like, well, he's all screwed up. I'm very committed to my job, but I'm also willing, if somebody were to ask me to do something consistently that caused me to have to leave my family at the most important times all the time, then I'm not committed to the job. I'll leave the job. I don't care that much because my priority still remains as my family, my health, my life. When we're done being police officers, who are we at that point? This is not an identity to me. It's a job and it's a career. But my priorities make it very easy for me to ensure that those things happen consistently.
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking when you were talking. It's like at some point, this career ends, and what's left over? If you're not prioritizing other things like your health and your family, what are you left with when the job is over? And I think that that's what makes retirement so challenging for a lot of people is that you're not prioritizing those other things in your life. And so when the career ends and everything that you did was for the career, and now you don't have that life, then you feel like you've lost everything. And that's when you start to feel, hear those stories about that trickiness of in that transition of retirement. So I'm glad that you brought that up because it's like you have a life and you have a family and you have other things that are important to you. And one day this career will end, and hopefully you still have that resemblance of a fulfilling life outside of the job.
Absolutely. We get so wrapped up in the moment of where we are, right? Because obviously our career happens during the most productive and critical parts of our life because we're the healthiest and we're able to make decisions. When I was a young lieutenant, I got asked by my chief to go represent the police department at a funeral for an officer who had passed away that had been a part of our department. He was in his late 80s, 90s when I went. I did not know him. I didn't know anything about it. I just put my Class A uniform on and I showed up. And it was one of the most life-changing experiences for me because of what I took away from it. And I walked in, I was greeted very kindly. He was the first, I think he was the second Black officer for our department in its history. So there was a bit of historic value to who he was also. But he was old enough. And one of the things that I did learn is if you live long enough, you don't have to, nobody has to go to your funeral because you'll go to all of theirs, right? So there were very few people that were police officers that were even at the funeral because he'd outlived all of them.
Mhm.
And I sat and I listened to his eulogy and the memories that people offered. And they spent the entire time talking about him and the work that he did in the military, the family that he had raised, his role as a neighborhood kind of friend sitting in his garage and everybody talking. And they spent all this time talking about him. And I kid you not, somewhere in there, they said, oh, and by the way, he was a police officer. And then they kept on talking. He was a police officer for 30 years. And that was a major part of his life. But when it was all said and done, there was so much to talk about him that it literally got a note of, oh, by the way, this is what he did. And I heard that and I thought, that's the way I want my funeral to be. At the end of it, I want it to be, oh, and by the way, he was a police officer when he was actually working. And we actually live the opposite many times. We want our funeral to be about our job as a police officer, and we're selling ourselves short when we do that because there's so much more to who we are.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was thinking. It's about who you are, not what you do. Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that with me. I want to talk about, so obviously, wellness is something that you're really passionate about. That's very, very clear. You are on the wellness committee for Cal Chief. You are the co-chair for the annual training symposium. So not only is wellness important to you, as an individual and how you live your life and finding that balance between, work and life, what are some of the things that you're doing, as a part of the wellness committee and the co-chair of the training symposium? What are some of the topics that you're finding to be really relevant or some of the areas of focus right now that you're seeing organizationally?
So it's interesting because I've been doing this for being on the committee now for a few years. So even in just a few years, we're seeing a transition. When I first started formally talking and meeting with other chiefs and command staff in the Cal Chiefs Wellness Committee, our focus was really about making sure that every department had wellness in it. That it was because it was still relatively new, and there were many chiefs who didn't even know what it was or knew it was that thing that they got to deal with eventually. So the initial focus 5 years ago was this is what wellness is. Let's start getting some building blocks in place. Let's make sure that there are things there for people like me who have a tragic murder in their family and nobody knows how to handle it. Right? We want to make sure that's the case. I would say that for the most part, not 100%, but for the most part, we're at a point now where agencies understand what wellness is. Some of them way more than others, but they all know. So where we used to see symposiums and courses specifically about how to start a wellness program, what is a wellness program, those aren't in demand anymore. I think we've hit our threshold there, and we're seeing a shift. And so what we're looking at now is not necessarily what are the programs that you can run. It's what does a culture of wellness look like in an organization? And in that culture of wellness, what programs are needed to support the consistent mindset of wellness being a top priority? And so we're seeing that in the shift. It's very interesting because people don't want to go to a class on wellness, but they want to go to classes where it's talked about in leadership, it's talked about in training, it's talked about in just the way that we spend our off time, how we interact with the new generation of employees. Wellness is so much more, like you said, than just psychological mental health counseling. It's fitness, it's hobbies, it's finance, it's sleep, it's nutrition, it's physical health, it's a lot of relationships. So finding ways to incorporate what is important to the profession and helping them understand that that contributes to a culture of wellness is the next challenge for those that are developing training.
And what do you think the secret to creating a culture of wellness is? Does it start with leadership and what does that look like?
It absolutely starts with leadership because culture starts with the leaders. And it may be the chief. It has to, at some level, include the chief. But it has to be all of the leadership and it has to be everybody. It's a mindset. So culture is a common set of values that everybody shares, right? And you can look at it as it's historical, meaning it's in place and it's been there. So you want to get it in place and then you want to keep it there. And culture is really more about the conversations that are open to being had in an organization. If you have an organization where someone doesn't feel comfortable saying, I'm not okay, or I need help, or even more, I just had a really great experience I'd like to share with you. That's a culture of wellness because we not only are there when people need help, but we're there to celebrate the wins when good things happen because that's part of that process. And once they're comfortable saying that, then the program, the culture, the programs of wellness can kick in, whether it be peer support, psychological counseling, a financial advisor, whatever it's going to be. But it starts with the culture, which is creating an environment where people feel like they can say, I'm not okay, or I'm doing great and I want to tell you why.
And I wrote this down and tell me if I'm on point here, that it sounds to me like you're saying creating a culture that creates a safe space where people feel like if they're not okay, then they can reach for the resources, but the resources don't come first. It's
Abs-
create that safe space first. Then, when people feel like they're safe and they're supported within that organization, then all the other stuff that you have is now accessible and utilized. And it creates kind of that, I don't want to say, I feel like buy-in is such a thing that's like said all the time, and we talk about buy-in a lot, but it kind of creates that. It's like people then want to reach for those things because they feel like they have a safe and supportive space to do so.
yeah, I think instead of buy-in, I would use the word acceptance.
Mm,
They accept it, and so you think about it. Flip what you just said. You've got all these programs, but they're worthless if nobody will use them. And the
100%.
only way that they're going to be used is if they feel they accept the fact that it's okay to use them. And I there's stories that are very personal that I won't tell, but I can tell you at least anecdotally. I knew it was working well in our department when I had somebody come to me and say, in essence, "I'm not well. I know you'll understand, and that's all I can say right now. And I'm going to be working on that." And then they were gone for a while. And I thought to myself, how great is it that they accepted and had the trust to know they could walk into the chief's office, say, "I'm not well, and I knew you'd understand." And that was, I didn't need to know anything else. I didn't ask anything else, and we'd already laid the groundwork with our culture, where I could then call HR and say, "Hey, I can't really explain why, but we're going to need to create a time code, and we're going to need to help this person out because they've got some stuff that they're working on." And we figured it out. It worked because the culture allowed it to work, and then the resources kicked in, and they were able to use them. And
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 what
I'll,
it, I'm
I
sorry,
was
go
going to say,
ahead.
sorry, I was going to say it doesn't end there, because for a lot of organizations, the reason why they don't feel comfortable or they won't accept it is because they pay attention to what happens when you come back. And so it's, if possible, and generally I think it is, you have to make sure that when they come back, it's seamless. They can come right back to what they were doing. They can do what they need to, and everyone will know that that was exactly what they needed. It's like rehab for an injury. It's
Mhm.
not, you're not broken, you're not damaged. You can come back and we will support you. And that way, the next person that feels like they need to say, "I'm not okay," they can do it, and they have confidence to know what it's going to look like throughout the entire process.
And there's a few things I want to touch on that you said, and I'm like writing my notes. But one, like what a huge accomplishment to have created a culture where someone does walk in and has that comfortability with you to say that I'm going to go seek help. And I know a lot of organizations don't have that, where you would never walk into the chief's office and say that. So what a huge accomplishment internally that you guys have. But I love how you said that people watch what happens, because I've heard this a few times, and that's so interesting because it's like if you say that it's a safe space and you say that, people can reach out when they need it and you have all these resources, but then that isn't really the reality of what happens, and they watch someone else kind of go through that. That's what's going to then turn them off to not want, everyone's kind of watching that one person or those few people. And so I like that you said that, because I do think that like people are watching to see, like, is it actually safe?
You make a very important point, and that is, from where I sit, and many times I don't control the outcome, and that's the scary part. So if somebody says I'm not well and they're legitimately not well, whether it be mentally, emotionally, physically, that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a happy ending to their journey. They may not be able to work again, but that's not necessarily the relevant factor. What people are watching is, what does the organization do to support them through it and even after that. So if you got someone that raises their hand and says, "I'm not well," and then ultimately they're so not well that being a police officer is not something they can do anymore, what are you doing as an organization? Are you putting them in that black hole abyss of, all right, now you're in work comp and we can't talk to you and get an attorney and you're litigated and the HR will be in touch with you and then they just disappear? Or are you still allowing them to be part of the family? Are you bringing them to the gatherings, the social gatherings after? Are you helping them transition to another job? Are you giving them references? Are you supporting their family? Are you bringing them meals as an organization? Maybe everybody chips in and brings a dinner. Like I'm just throwing stuff out there, but
Yeah.
there's so much you can do to show that even when you can't do what it is that everybody thinks you're supposed to do, you're still loved and you're still
Yeah.
cared for. And that's what they're watching for, is to make sure that if they say they're not well, that they're going to be taken care of.
And I love the words that you use of like, they're still loved, they're still a part of the family, we're still caring for them. That's so important. And again, I think it just circles back to everything you said about creating that, like the actual culture, like creating that to where people know that like no matter what, like I'm still going to be cared for and loved, and I'm still going to be a part of this family. The other thing that you said earlier that I thought was so important is that the relating the physical injury and a mental injury as being similar. And I think that's a perspective that a lot of people haven't maybe heard before or maybe don't realize. And I would love if you kind of maybe talked a little bit more about that part of it, because I agree that, there are mental injuries that can be addressed in a similar fashion and, as a physical injury. But sometimes it's not treated that way. It's like if you have like something mentally, it's like you're out or there's that stigma associated. What is your opinion on that, or was your perspective on like physical and mental injuries being similar or can be treated in a similar fashion by the organization?
Yeah, so I'm certainly not a doctor or certified to
Right. No,
speak on
yeah.
any of that stuff.
Me either.
However, I I my degree in college is in communications. So one of the things that you learn in communication is how much words matter, and words have meaning. And so you have to be very intentional with the words that you use. So if we're saying that somebody's suffering from PTSD, they are suffering a disorder.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily know if that's something you can come back from. And it also really stigmatizes the person. But if somebody is working through PTSI, which is an injury,
Right.
think about how that changes the approach, the mindset, and the response from the organization. If I've played sports my whole life. If you're injured, what's the first thing you want to do? Is you want to get the immediate treatment and then the physical therapy and whatever it needs to get back. And then you slowly ease someone back to where they can perform the way that they used to. Or if not, at least it'll start to show itself. And then you can help them transition to whatever their next best um, capabilities are going to be. But you're working through it. You're not
Yep.
suffering from. Suffering doesn't seem like it has an end date to me. It seems like it just goes on forever. But a lot of the things that we deal with, whether it be exposure to traumatic events or outside things that happen in your life that are traumatic, they can be overcome. Even if they scar you permanently, they can be overcome. You can work through them. I know that because I've been able to do that. And you can actually become better because of it, right? So it's almost that bionic man or bionic woman thing, right? You get hurt, you get a better part put into you. You recover from that. I look at my wife, and she hates it when I bring her into this, but the things she went through with the tragedy that we had with family members losing their lives, it was horrible. It was horrific. But on the backside of it now, with everything she's done to recover from that injury, she can help people in ways she never could before, because she can empathize and she can see, like, if we're in a room, she will know if somebody's suffering from similar trauma because she can just feel it. And so as human beings, we have to recognize that it's an opportunity to heal when we use the right language to be able to help our people get back to where they need to be and even better.
Thank you for saying that. I agree that words matter. And I do think that the things that you go through can be an opportunity to grow and to help others. And I can deeply relate to that. I think that even in you sharing your story, I know you can relate to that, me sharing that story with you and your wife. And I do think that there are hard things that we had to experience, but they were opportunities for us to help others in different ways. And so, at least my perspective, and I'm grateful now for a lot of the things that happened because it did give me the opportunity to, be in service of others and to have that empathy that maybe I wouldn't have had otherwise. And so, I can deeply relate to that. And I do think that words matter. And I think that if you tell someone that they're broken, enough times, people are going to feel like they're broken, instead of like, no, like this is an opportunity. Like, yes, that was really hard. And like, I understand that you're hurting and, that we need to give you resources, but you're not broken or you're not going to be broken forever, So I agree that words matter. I wanted to ask you because you've been in this profession for so long and you have so many different perspectives with the different roles and things that you've been through in your personal life. What are some words of wisdom that you could share with someone who's earlier in their career that maybe you wish you would have known earlier in your career that would have helped you out, or maybe a piece of advice that has helped you or that you wish you would have listened to earlier in your career that would have helped you? What words of advice would you share with someone earlier in their career?
Yeah, so that's such a good question. And I wish that I could go back and slap my former me around and hear this as well. The first thing I would say is you need to be confident enough to lead by example because there are people who will see you and they will follow. You can make a difference right now. And it does not matter. People get so lost in the rank, right? We know that every organization has formal and informal leaders, and they also have rank, right? Because a lot of people of rank aren't leaders because they don't know how to lead; they just administer. So if you're an informal leader, meaning you don't have any rank, you now have a choice. Do you want to be a good leader or a bad leader? So be a good leader, and no matter where you are, whether you're a chief, you're an officer who's an informal leader, that comes with risk because people won't always agree with you, and you may be ostracized. But at the same time, lead by example. Now people will follow you, and that you'd be amazed how much you can influence people. um, the other thing, and I mentioned this earlier, is start taking notes. And I don't mean like writing a list down, I mean in your head, and start saying, if I'm ever in charge, if I ever have influence, I will do that, I won't do that, and start keeping a list of the things that you can make a difference in. And then when you get to that point, um, then you'll be ready and you'll know what you need to work on. I recognize you cannot control your supervisors. They're going to do what they're going to do. They're going to treat you the way that they're going to treat you. You can manage that, but I learned from everyone. For some people, I learned what to do, and for others, I learned what not to do. But everybody teaches me something. And then I encourage people who are interested in promoting, taking on leadership roles, even if it's as a training officer or mentoring somebody, do it with the intent to change the cycle, because it's very easy to train someone the way you were trained. Number one, because you don't know any different, or number two, because you went through it, therefore they need to go through it. It's okay to change, break that cycle, and just treat them differently. And it may mean that you have to actually think, okay, I don't know how to do it differently. What will it look like? And then try it. But that's where your list comes in. If you've got a list of things that you did not like, then don't do that. Don't repeat that and break that cycle. And you'd be amazed. This new generation, for all the quirkiness and things that I hear about them, they're really, really good at absorbing and understanding and recognize how they're being treated and responding accordingly. So if we want to treat them the way that we were treated growing up, or being trained, then you've just created another round that will not happen until you're gone. So let's break the cycle and let's make it different for the future.
Thank you. Those are great words of advice. And I've honestly, like I told you before, I was so looking forward to this conversation and it's been one of my favorites so far. So
So
thank you
nice.
so much for joining. And if there's anything else we missed or anything else you want to add, now is the chance. Otherwise, that's all I have.
You're awesome. I appreciate it. I will say this. You'd asked me even before we had went live with this, what you've talked about your why, and I value so much what you do and bringing yoga and just the mindfulness into everything. You asked what's my why, and you made me think about that. So you're not going to get me to think about it without at least talking about it real quickly,
Please.
because I don't know what my why is entirely, but it started to make me think about what's my foundation. And I already alluded to a couple of these things, and I think it's important for everyone to understand. Again, thinking about what are they going to say at your funeral if you live to be 90. My foundation is this, and I lead like this every day. I'm not that important. My role is the office of the chief of police is important, but I personally am not that important when I put on this uniform. Um, I am very replaceable. Like there are people that will replace me today if I screw up or I step down or anything else. This is a job. It's not an identity. And with all that being said, this is my window where I get to make a difference. And I've been in law enforcement for 32 years, and I've learned so much over that time. So many people have contributed to who I am right now. And when you get to a point where you can actually have influence, whether it's rank, position, whatever it is, your window is very small. So, what are you going to do with that window to make a difference? And if you can make a difference, then you've just respected everybody who's helped you get to where you are, by carrying on their legacy and then creating, like I said, breaking that cycle and creating a new legacy. Um, I am all about connection, and I'll finish with this. When I started as a police officer, once I figured out what it meant to be a police officer, my goal coming in was that I wanted to change the world. Um, and I realized real quick that police officers can change the world individually, usually for the worse, right? They can do something stupid, it can go viral, and you've just hurt everything. So changing the world for positive is very difficult to do as an individual person. So I've shifted that focus now. My goal and my why is not to change the world, but it's to change someone's world. And you do that through connections. And that's why, when you said I walked up and I was nice to you, because that's what I do. That's who I want to be. That's my why. Is you never know when you're going to influence somebody, and when you're wearing a uniform, I guarantee you your interactions with people stick with them for the rest of their lives because they don't often talk to you. So if you can change someone's world and get them to say you're not like every other one, that will stick with them forever, and you've just actually made a difference that you'll never realize.
You're amazing. I love that. And thank you for sharing that. I'm so glad that you took that opportunity because I didn't do a good job of asking. And I know we talked about that before, but I'm so glad that you took that opportunity to share your why. And I love that. Like maybe I can't change the world, but I can change someone's world. And that this is your opportunity to make an impact and a positive difference in someone's world at least. So thank you so much again for your time. I so appreciate it. And I hope that, I mean, we've bumped into each other now a few times over the years, so I'm hoping that we'll run into each other at some point in person, and maybe it'll be over in your town because you live in such a beautiful area. I'll come visit.
Yeah, we owe you a ride on the beach, so
I
I'm
would
looking
love
forward to
that.
that.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Paige.